She was the kind of woman people looked through, not at. Margot Cleary had worked at Castellan Shipping and Logistics for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Not that she was counting exactly, but numbers were her language, and she had always been fluent. She sat at the second desk, from the left in the back corridor of the 7th floor, wedged between a fire exit that nobody used and a photocopier that groaned like a dying animal every time someone sent a document after 4 in the afternoon. She ate lunch at her desk. She wore the same rotation of loose cardigans in grey and navy and a muted burgundy that she thought made her look professional without drawing attention. She arrived 8 minutes early every single morning, made herself a tea from the break room kettle before anyone else got in, and she had never once been invited to the Friday drinks that the sales floor organized at the bar downstairs. She was fine with that. That was what she told herself, anyway. The truth was more complicated, as truths tend to be. Margot was 31 years old, and sharper than any person in that building had the grace to notice. She had a memory like a steel trap and an eye for patterns that most people spent entire careers trying to develop. She could glance at a column of numbers and feel, in the way some people felt a coming storm in their joints, when something was wrong. It wasn't calculation so much as instinct. The kind of instinct that only comes from years of loving something nobody else thinks is worth loving. She loved the numbers. She loved the order of them, the way they never lied. People lied constantly, in ways both enormous and banal. Numbers only ever did what you told them to do. And if something looked wrong, it was because something was wrong. And something was very, very wrong with Castellan Shipping's books. She had noticed it first on a Tuesday in late October, a rounding error that shouldn't have been there, in a subsidiary account tied to a port terminal in Halifax. It was small, $11,000, distributed across 6 invoices, each one fractionally inflated. To anyone else, it would have looked like administrative slippage. To Margot, it looked like the tip of something massive and cold and dark beneath the surface. She didn't say anything. She opened a second spreadsheet, her personal one, the one she kept on a USB drive she took home in her coat pocket every night, and she started keeping notes. That was 4 weeks ago. Now it was a Thursday evening, and the office had emptied out, and Margot was still at her desk because the server room pulled the day's transaction logs at 7 p.m. And she had learned that if she cross-referenced those logs against the shipping manifests before they were reconciled in the morning, she could sometimes catch discrepancies that the automated system smoothed over before anyone official could see them. She had caught 17 of them in the past 4 weeks. The fluorescent lights above her hummed. Her tea had gone cold. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Vancouver's downtown core glittered in the November dark, the North Shore mountains invisible behind cloud. She tucked a strand of dark auburn hair behind her ear and scrolled down another page of figures. She almost missed the sound of the elevator. Almost. She heard it, the soft mechanical exhale, the doors parting, and she instinctively minimized her personal spreadsheet and opened a dummy file of payroll corrections she kept ready for exactly this kind of moment. Her heart was hammering, though she kept her face completely still, eyes fixed on the screen, fingers moving with deliberate calm over the keyboard. Footstep, Italian leather on hardwood, the particular purposeful rhythm of someone who had never once in their life been in a hurry because the world adjusted its pace to them, not the other way around. She did not look up. "You're still here." The voice was low and precise, with the particular cadence of a man who was accustomed to saying a thing exactly once. Margot made herself count to 2 before she looked up, because she had learned that reacting too quickly made people think you were frightened. She was frightened, but that was entirely beside the point. Adrian Voss stood at the edge of the corridor, one hand loose at his side, the other holding the jacket of his charcoal suit folded over his forearm. He was 41 years old, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man the city of Vancouver had long since decided it was safer not to ask too many questions about. Tall, dark-haired with the first silver threads at his temples, a face built from angles that had never quite softened into approachability, with dark eyes that catalogued everything they landed on. He ran Castellan Shipping the way he ran everything else. From the center of a web so fine and so vast that most people who were caught in it never felt the threads at all. He was also, incidentally, her employer, in the most remote and theoretical sense. Margot had never spoken to him before. She wasn't sure he knew she existed. "Mr. Voss," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was quietly proud of that. He looked at her for a moment. Not through her, she was used to people looking through her, but at her. The distinction was small and significant at once. "You're in accounts," he said. It was not a question. "Accounts reconciliation, yes. It's 7:30, I'm aware." Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly. More like the particular attention of a man who had just heard a sound that didn't belong in a familiar room. "Don't stay too late," he said, and then he walked past her, toward the executive suite at the far end of the corridor, and Margot sat very still until she heard his office door close, and then she let out a breath so slowly it barely made a sound. She saved her USB drive. She shut down her workstation. She put on her coat. She went home and she did not sleep. 4 days later, Margot Cleary vanished. It happened so quickly and so cleanly that for the first hour, nobody in the building even noticed. She had been at her desk at 8:52 in the morning. Curtis in IT had seen her when he came in, and by 9:15 her chair was empty. Her cardigan was folded over the back of it, and her tea mug was sitting on her mousepad, still warm. The stairwell door at the far end of the corridor had a sensor. The sensor logged that it had opened at 9:07. The camera covering that exit had been offline for maintenance since 7 a.m., which was an inconvenient coincidence, or not a coincidence at all, depending on who you asked. Nobody asked. Not until the call came in. Adrian Voss was in a meeting on the 32nd floor when his phone vibrated. He ignored it. It vibrated again. He glanced at the screen, saw that it was his head of security, Felix, and stepped out of the boardroom without a word of explanation to the 12 people left sitting around the table. "Talk," he said. Felix's voice was carefully neutral in the way it only ever was when the news was genuinely bad. "We have a problem at the office. The accounts girl, Cleary, Margot Cleary, second desk in the back corridor, she's gone. Taken. One of my men found her bag in the stairwell on 3. Her phone was in it." Adrian went very still. "Who has her?" His voice was flat, stripped of everything. "We think it's Price's people. There's been a van on rotation on Robson for the past 10 days. We should have flagged it sooner." Adrian turned away from the boardroom door. His jaw was tight. "Find out where they've taken her. We're working on Felix." A single word, and the temperature in his voice dropped 10 degrees. "Find out where they've taken her. You have 40 minutes. He ended the call. He stood in the corridor for perhaps 3 seconds, which was the longest he could remember standing still in years. His mind moved quickly in the way it always did. Not frantically, but with the cold, precise efficiency of someone who had long since made peace with the fact that the world he lived in was capable of atrocities, and who had learned to operate within that knowledge without flinching. He thought about a woman with dark auburn hair, bent over a keyboard at 7:30 in the evening, who had looked up at him with steady grey eyes and a voice that didn't shake. He thought about what that level of composure in someone that vulnerable in that situation might mean. He pulled up a different contact on his phone. "Check her workstation," he said when it answered. "Personal drives, anything she might have been keeping off the main server. Don't touch the IT department, go around them. And I want her home address and emergency contact in the next 10 minutes. He was back in the elevator before the call ended. He wasn't going back to the meeting. The warehouse was on the Fraser River, east of the city proper, the kind of industrial building that looked abandoned from the outside because it was meant to. Margot was sitting in a metal chair in the middle of a concrete floor, and she was doing the thing she had always done in moments of crisis, which was to make herself count. The exposed beams above her, 14. The windows along the north wall, most of them blacked out, 8. The men she could identify by sound, 4, possibly 5. The one standing closest to her, the one who had done most of the talking. She recognized his voice from a phone call she had overheard 8 days ago, when she'd been in the server room running a late backup and 2 men from the executive floor had passed in the corridor not knowing she was there. She had a very good memory. Her left cheekbone ached. Her wrists were zip-tied behind the chair back. She had a split lip from when she'd stumbled on the stairwell landing, and the man behind her hadn't felt the need to stop her fall. She breathed slowly, evenly, and she kept her face as still as she could because she had grown up in a house where stillness meant survival, and old habits had a way of being exactly right when you needed them most. "The drive," the man said. He crouched in front of her. His name was Wade. She'd heard one of the others say it. He had a face like an unfinished sketch, bland and forgettable except for the eyes, which were the eyes of someone who had decided long ago that other people were simply obstacles in varying stages of removal. "We know you have one. We've been watching you for 2 weeks, Margot." I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Her voice came out calmer than she expected. She filed that away as something to be grateful for later. You've been pulling discrepancy logs, Wade said. The automated reconciliation system has a ghost audit function that flags repeated manual overrides. Did you know that? She hadn't known that. She didn't say so. The drive, he said again. I leave my personal items at home, Margot said. You're welcome to search the office. Wade stood up slowly. He looked at her for a long moment, with the particular expression of a man who has decided to stop being patient. He said something to the man behind her that she didn't catch. And then a hand closed in her hair and yanked her head back, and she clenched her teeth and did not make a sound, because she was 31 years old, and she had not survived this long by letting people see the things that hurt her. The door at the far end of the warehouse exploded inward. It was not a metaphor. It came off its hinges entirely, with a sound like a thunderclap, and then there was a very brief, very absolute chaos. Shouting, the staccato crack of gunfire, the clatter of men scrambling for positions they were never going to reach in time. Margot felt the hand release her hair. She dropped her chin to her chest and made herself as small as possible in the chair, and she counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, silence, then footsteps. That rhythm again, the one she'd memorized without meaning to on a Thursday evening when she'd thought no one knew she existed. Adrian Voss crouched in front of her. He had blood on the cuff of his sleeve. Someone else's, she thought, from the way he moved. He was entirely unhurt, entirely composed, as if he'd stepped through a busted warehouse door into a firefight, the way other men stepped off curbs. His dark eyes moved over her face with an intensity that was almost clinical except for something underneath it. Something that didn't belong to the careful, cold man she'd seen in the corridor. Margot, he said quietly. The fact that he used her first name startled her more than anything else that had happened in the past 6 hours. I'm all right, she said automatically. You have a cut above your eye, I know. His jaw tightened. He looked past her briefly at Wade, who was on the floor with 2 of Adrian's men standing over him, and something moved through Adrian's expression that Margot decided very deliberately not to examine too closely. He looked back at her. I'm going to cut the restraints, he said. Don't move until I tell you. He produced a folding knife from his jacket pocket. Of course he did, she thought, and almost laughed, which was probably shock, and she felt the pressure on her wrists release. She went to stand up. Her legs, apparently, had not received the message about remaining composed, because they buckled immediately. Adrian caught her by the elbows before she reached the floor. His grip was very steady. Take a moment, he said. She was acutely conscious of the fact that she was a large woman being held upright by a man who could clearly have done this for hours without inconvenience. And she waited for the condescension that she had learned over 31 years to expect in that particular configuration of bodies, the slight pause, the adjustment, the micro-expression of someone recalibrating their effort. It didn't come. He held her with the same automatic certainty with which he seemed to do everything else, and he looked at her face, not at anything else, and waited. Her legs steadied. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said, which she found oddly reassuring. They took Wade and the others somewhere that Margot decided, for her own peace of mind, not to ask about. Felix, who turned out to be a large and surprisingly gentle man with a Montreal accent, and the bearing of someone who had seen absolutely everything and been impressed by almost none of it, brought her a first aid kit in the back of a black SUV and matter-of-factly cleaned the cut above her eye while Adrian made calls in the front seat. She caught fragments. Yes, that account. A pause, all of it. Another pause. No. Tonight. She understood, without needing to be told, that the problem she had been quietly documenting for 4 weeks was now being handled in the way that problems were handled in Adrian Voss's world, which was not the way they were handled in hers, and that her spreadsheet had probably been both necessary and catastrophically dangerous all at once. Felix handed her a bottle of water. She drank half of it.
You're not going to ask questions,
Felix observed. It was less of a question than a statement of mild appreciation.
I have a lot of questions,
Margot said. I'm choosing not to ask them. Felix smiled, which she suspected was not something he did very often. Smart. She is, said Adrian from the front seat, without turning around, and Margot felt something shift in her chest that she chose for now to set aside. He drove her home himself. She lived in a 1-bedroom in Kitsilano, the kind of building that was clean and quiet and slightly past its best years, with a buzzer that sometimes worked and a lobby with one sad potted fern. She had not expected him to walk her to the door, But he did, and she stood at her own threshold and found that she had temporarily run out of the words she usually kept in stock for exactly these kinds of silences. "The USB drive," she said finally. Adrian looked at her. "It's behind the false back of the top drawer of my filing cabinet at the office," she said. "The false back is held on with 2 regular finishing nails on the left side. There are 47 separate discrepancy logs and a cross-reference summary document. I was going to." She stopped. "I don't know what I was going to do with it." He was quiet for a moment. "You knew it was dangerous," he said. "I knew the numbers were wrong. I couldn't just leave them wrong." Something happened in his expression then, not quite a softening, because she suspected that particular architecture was not built for softening, but a shift, a recognition of something. "How long?" he asked. 4 weeks. Since the 3rd Tuesday in October. And you said nothing. To whom? She met his eyes steadily. "I'm the woman in the back corridor that nobody can name without checking the org chart." I had no idea how far it went or who was involved. Saying something to the wrong person was worse than saying nothing. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she had to resist the urge to look away. "You were protecting yourself," he said. "I was protecting the evidence," she said. "There's a difference." He almost smiled. She wasn't entirely sure because it was very brief and very contained, but she thought so. "Go inside," he said. "Lock the door. Felix will have someone on the street tonight. That isn't necessary." "It isn't a question of necessity," he said. "Go inside, Margot." She went inside. She locked the door. She sat down on her couch in her coat, and she stared at the ceiling of her apartment for a very long time. She thought about the way he had said her name in the warehouse. She thought about how he had held her without adjusting for her. She thought about all the mornings she had made tea alone in an empty office and eaten lunch at her desk and walked past the Friday drinks without being called back. She thought about a man who ran the criminal underbelly of a major Canadian city, holding her upright in a ruined warehouse and not once looking at her like she was anything other than someone who mattered. She wasn't ready to do anything about any of that. She was aware that it existed. That was enough for tonight. 3 days passed. Adrian Voss did not contact her. She went back to work on the 2nd day because she was not a woman who stayed home, and she sat at her desk and did her job, and she did not look toward the executive suite at the end of the corridor. The USB drive was gone from the filing cabinet, which she had expected. The discrepancy accounts had been closed and rerouted, which she had also expected, though she was mildly impressed by the speed. Curtis from IT stopped by her desk on Wednesday afternoon with the particular sheepish energy of someone who has just been told to notice a person they had consistently failed to notice. "Hey," he said. Are you okay? I heard you were sick." "I'm fine," Margot said. "Thank you for asking." He hovered. She returned to her screen. He left. She was not fine exactly. She was something more complicated than fine. She was a woman who had looked at the edge of a very dark thing and not blinked, and who was now sitting at her desk in a cardigan wondering if that meant something about her, or just about the situation, and whether those two things were actually separable. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't have saved. The restaurant on the ground floor of the Fairmont. 8 o'clock tonight. AV. She stared at the message for a long time. She was aware that this was a man she should, by most reasonable metrics, be afraid of. She was aware that the world he occupied had rules that were nothing like the rules she had grown up believing in. She was aware that she was a 31-year-old accountant in a cardigan who ate lunch alone and had not been invited to a single social event in this building in 3 years. She was also aware that she had sat in a chair in a warehouse with her wrists tied and her face bleeding, and she had not given him anything. Not her composure, not her fear, not the location of the drive, and that he had come through a door to get to her with the particular certainty of a man who had already decided the outcome before he arrived. She typed back, "I'll need to go home and change first." The reply came in under a minute. "Take whatever time you need." She wore a dark green dress she had bought 8 months ago and worn exactly once to a cousin's engagement party in Burnaby. It had a neckline she'd spent 20 minutes second-guessing in the mirror before she left the apartment. Her dark auburn hair she wore down, which she almost never did at work. She took the bus to the Fairmont because she needed the 17 minutes to construct something that felt like equilibrium. He was already there when she arrived, at a table in the corner by the window, and he stood when he saw her cross the room, which was a thing men so rarely bothered to do anymore that it briefly knocked her off stride. He looked at the dress, he looked at her face. He pulled out her chair. You look well, he said. You've seen me look considerably worse, she said, sitting down. So the bar is perhaps lower than usual. He sat across from her, that almost smile again, a little more visible this time. Fair point, they ordered. She had the halibut. He had whatever the kitchen sent when his name made the reservation, which appeared to be a special category of experience unto itself. She watched him manage the sommelier with the same calm, complete authority with which he managed everything, and she felt something settle in her chest that she recognized, with some surprise, as ease. The accounts, she said, when the sommelier had moved on. The subsidiary in Halifax. There were 3 more, weren't there? Calgary, Prince George, and one that routed through a company called Aurelian Freight. Adrian looked at her across the table. You found 4, she said. I only found 1. You had people looking for the others. Yes, because you already suspected. I had begun to, he said. You moved faster than my own team. She absorbed this. Wade was working for someone else. He was. That situation has been resolved. She understood what that meant. She did not pursue it. You could have just asked me, she said instead, about the drive. You could have called me into your office any time in the past 4 weeks. I didn't know what you had until 3 days ago, he said, and by then you were already gone. You found me in under 2 hours. I found you in 47 minutes. She looked at him. That's fast. I have resources, he said simply, and then, after a pause that had weight to it, and I was motivated. The word landed in the space between them, and neither of them addressed it directly, which was, Margot thought, perhaps the most honest kind of conversation she had ever had. They ate, they talked, carefully at first, and then less carefully, the way people do when they discover that another person is genuinely interested in what they have to say. He asked her about her work, and she told him, not the polished version she gave in performance reviews, but the real version, the part about the patterns and the way numbers felt like language, and how she had known since she was 12 years old that she wanted to spend her life in the grammar of figures. He listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been. She asked him, because she could not entirely help herself, how he had built Castellan from a shipping brokerage into what it was now. He looked at her steadily for a moment. Which version of that question are you asking? Both, she said. But you can choose which one to answer. Another silence, and then he answered both, and she listened, and she thought that the most dangerous thing about Adrian Voss was not his network or his resources or his capacity for ruthlessness. It was that he was genuinely, quietly, devastatingly intelligent, and that he had clearly spent a very long time surrounded by people who did not require him to be anything other than powerful. You've never had anyone in that building look at you, he said, toward the end of the evening. He said it plainly, without performance. She considered deflecting. She didn't. No, I noticed you, he said. 7 weeks ago, the Thompson file audit, you found a discrepancy that my financial team had missed for 8 months. I saw your name on the memo. I started paying attention after that. She thought about all the evenings she had stayed late believing she was invisible. She thought about how wrong and how right she had been at once. You could have said something, she said, and the words came out quieter than she intended. I could have, he agreed. I should have. I'm saying something now. She looked at him across the candlelit table in the restaurant of the Fairmont Hotel in Vancouver, British Columbia, on a Thursday evening in November, with the North Shore Mountains finally clear in the dark sky outside the window, and she thought that 31 years was a very long time to be invisible, and that she was so extraordinarily tired of it. All right, she said. He reached across the table and his hand covered hers, and she turned her hand over and let it. Outside, the city moved in its enormous and indifferent way, full of things it kept hidden, full of lights in windows where no one ever pulled the curtain back to see who was watching. But here, at this table, in this small and carefully lit corner of the world, Margot Cleary was not invisible at all. She was, for the first time in longer than she could precisely calculate, entirely and completely seen. And that, she thought, was the only number that had ever really mattered.